Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Cricket Beyond Borders. I am your host Aryan Surana, and today we'll be previewing Ashes in this episode. I am delighted to welcome my colleagues at Guerilla Cricket, Tony Bishop, who is an avid follower of Middlesex, a senior cricket writer and a commentator at Guerilla Cricket, and Messi Jez, who lives in Perth. He follows the fortunes of the Australian team and he used to live in England back in the day. First of all, how are you?
I'm in fine order. I'm looking forward, first of all, tomorrow to the World Test Championship, then to the Ashes. It's a huge summer. I'm thrilled and excited, but a little saddened by the fact it's compacted into such a short time frame. And I think there will be prices to pay for the bodies of some of the cricketers who are being asked to do that. But nonetheless, genuinely excited. Great to be here too.
So I'm well. I'm a bit damp and cold. I had 6 inches of rain in the last 2 days, after none for 6 months, basically. But cricket is the great joy of the Australian winter for me. The Test matches in England start around 6 o'clock in the evening and go through to 1:30 in the morning. So that's perfect evening entertainment right through June and July for me. So I'm thoroughly excited, and I feel more doubtful about this series than I have any for a long time, to be honest.
Interesting.
Wonderful to have both of you here on this episode. And as you rightly mentioned, Tony, we have some high octane cricket on the cards. The buzz around the Ashes has been archetypal, and it is tailgating the World Test Championship. The hyperbole has been a common theme. Shots are being fired from both ends as far as the build up to the Ashes is concerned. Nathan Lyon has predicted a 5-0 rout despite the Aussies having
He's the
not
new
won a
McGrath.
series. Having not won a series in 22 years in England. And on the other hand, Stuart Broad has undermined Australia's Ashes victory in 2021, which coincided with the pandemic, saying it does not count in his mind because COVID-19 restrictions made it impossible to function normally during the series.
I don't think that's done a lot for Broad's credentials as a pundit,
Certainly
but it
not his
has done.
popularity in Australia.
Well, I think it's just put up his stock as comedian very quickly.
Well, I'll tell you one thing.
He was having a laugh, and everybody else sort of had a laugh
Yeah.
with him.
I think so. One thing that is interesting there is that one of the things that I think is possibly true these days, particularly since the sandpaper gate and all of those things, and the Justin Langer moving on and all of those kind of stuff, is there's a general feeling that cricketers now, because they play on the world stage in so many franchises with each other, that somehow to a certain extent the edge, certainly the nastier edge, is not quite what it was. And what is quite interesting is I think those two comments have been made by two players who tend to be outside of that that sort of franchise bubble where they all play with each other. I
think there's a bit of that,
coincidence,
Tony.
but could well be true.
Well, yeah, I do think the change in personalities has helped, but I also think there's just a better appreciation of how no matches are won in the newspapers, and it doesn't matter what you say. It's your play that's going to make the difference.
Yeah.
And especially the English tabloids, but the Australian tabloids aren't much better in terms of picking up something and making something out of nothing. And I think the exposure to social media that a lot of cricketers have had and then pulled away from makes them realise how vitriolic and damaging all that stuff is. And they thought, well, why bother? Why bother?
Trash talk before major sporting events has always been a way to get column inches. These days, click-throughs.
Yeah.
But the fact is, some things in life never change. I'm delighted to a certain extent that a little bit of niggle and friendly rivalry, there's nothing wrong with that. As long as you can shake hands at the end of it and feel I go back to the spirit of 2005, which at the end the image of Shane Warne shaking hands with Flintoff and that wonderful picture. I don't care how hard fought it is. I don't mind if there's a bit of edge, a bit of niggle, a bit of sledge. It's all part and parcel. Just don't take it off the field. And
Brett
if you
Lee, I
achieve
think
that,
it
fantastic.
was.
Brett Lee, yeah.
Brett Lee on his knees with, I think it was Flintoff
Oh, it
consoling
was Brett
him,
Lee,
wasn't
was it? Yeah, I thought it was Shane Warne, but yes, definitely.
Yeah, and another bone of contention ahead of the Ashes has been Sussex inking a deal with Steve Smith. The short stint. It has cleaved the English cricketing discourse into two spheres, with the general consensus being that England are providing Smith valuable practice ahead of the Ashes, although a small minority, including the Sussex head coach Paul Fabres, do believe that by signing stalwarts like Cheteshwar Pujara and Steve Smith, they're actually raising the profile of English cricket and allowing the county cricketers to rub the shoulders with the
Oh,
best in the business.
you had Smith, Pujara, and Ollie Robinson all playing in Division 2 of the county championship. Brilliant, fantastic. That's exactly what you need. And in Pujara's, well, we talk about the Ashes, but in Pujara's case, it's 100% genuine, I think, affection and joy of playing for them and how well he does it. Personally, I don't mind it. I know what Farbury said. And sure, Smith needs to get himself in some nick. But the county championship benefits, the quality of the cricket that's played in the county championship benefits, Sussex benefits. He puts bums on seats. Genuinely, to me, it's utterly reasonable. No worse than Ravi Ashwin playing one game for Surrey. Admittedly, he took 672 or something, but he did it. He did it purely short-term deal. I think English counties should never turn down, even on a short-term basis, the opportunity to get the genuine top players of the game. And if why shouldn't they do it ahead of a series? Everyone wins in my book.
There's a couple of dozen Australians playing county cricket at the moment. And I think it's good for their development as cricketers. In the long term, that makes for better Test cricket. And it's great for the counties. I mean, you look at people like Chris Rogers and Justin Langer, who spent years and years grafting out runs
At
in county
Middlesex.
cricket. Yeah. And, they became much loved members of the counties they played for as well. This is a short-term deal, but it's true. One thing that Smith said that I do believe is that he just wanted to play cricket, and he didn't get a stint in the IPL. So he would have gone and played club cricket or league cricket or anything to get a game, I suspect, because that's what he does. That's who he is.
Didn't they have like a 7-hour training session, of which he spent about 6 hours just refining his batting technique?
And then he went to the nets afterwards.
Yeah. So I think it'll work. Labuschagne has been knocking out runs for Glamorgan. Again, interesting enough in Division 2. Smith, Nisa, who I think probably will get a look in the Ashes. I'm sure we may well come on to that. Marcus Harris didn't get the call, I don't think, but he's been doing a decent job. Always has for Glamorgan, even though he was described as mediocre by Justin Langer. Probably one of the reasons Justin Langer's not there anymore. It's like I said, everybody wins. I'm just a little sad that by and large it doesn't work the other way with the Sheffield Shield. I know there's timing and other things go on, but I think it is a pity from an English perspective we don't get more players going there to play in that.
Yeah, correct. England is one of the few countries which makes a provision for overseas players to be playing in their domestic competition. So I just want both of you to shed a light on the financial implications and the crowd turnout factor as well.
Do you mean for county cricket or for the Test matches themselves?
I mean, what kind of an impact does a Mohammad Rizwan playing in the county championship or Pujara turning up for Sussex has on the crowd factor? Because from what I gleaned out of match reports and the Twitter discourse was that the crowd was decent. The turnout was quite remarkable when these guys were on the field.
Yeah, I think you've got to look at two things. One is the attendance at the game. You've got to look at the streaming, and you've got to look at the global attention that it also brings. I also know, without giving, as a regular attendee of Middlesex's board meetings, not board meetings, but when they open it up for members and stuff, members meetings, if you take an Ashes year, generally, then the central revenue generated from the ECB to the counties kind of trebles in an Ashes year and an India year, and it is less everywhere else. So when you look at pure finances, those series are hugely important. I think it is just one of we've had many great, as you mentioned Chris Rogers, and we had Adam Voges for years as well,
Yeah.
who, God, I wish we had him now. Admittedly, a 10-year younger version, but he was magnificent. We had Umesh Yadav last year playing for us from India. Absolutely terrific. Rahane had a great spell at Hampshire. I think you've mentioned Pujara.
You look at
Rizwan
Surrey
came
with
over.
Hashim Amla for all those
Hashim
years
Amla,
too.
sorry. So cricket's a global game. Look at football. Take a look at football. If I look at any single Premier League team, typically you'll have 3 English players at most. Sport's becoming more global. Cricket very much the same. If it's the best players putting bums on seats and expanding the game so that people in Australia are interestedly watching Sussex playing Worcestershire on a county stream, all the better. It cannot. I don't see how anyone in that deal loses. Messers, what do you reckon?
I agree entirely. I think the Sheffield Shield is a little different in that there's only 6 Sheffield Shield teams, so there's a limited availability and there's strong competition for them. I think, without being too derogatory of county cricket, that probably the general standard of Sheffield Shield cricket is quite a bit higher than county cricket without the overseas players. But the other thing is the structure is such that they only play 5 games, generally speaking, 5 games very early in the season. Then there's a big break for the Big Bash. They play 5 games at the end of the season. So there's not a lot of continuity in there for someone. And one of the things, particularly say someone like Western Australia, it's been really successful, has been about team building and consistency within the team. And frankly, you'd be struggling to get into the West Australian team at the moment. They've won the Sheffield Shield, the Big Bash, and the One Day Cup twice. This year and the previous year, both of them. And they've got bowlers who would probably get close to getting an English Test spot who can't get into the West Australian side from time to time. So it's a different model entirely. But that being said, we certainly have had the privilege of some wonderful cricketers. I remember watching Barry Richards play at the WACA for South Australia. Tony Locke captained Western Australia at that time, actually. And Ian Botham in Queensland for quite a while. So there have been sort of marquee players come in from time to time, but I think generally speaking, the feeling now is very strongly that there is so much competition for places as it is. There's not really space to put a lot of extra people in.
Yes, absolutely. Some wonderful points there. Yeah, it's just good to hear about these experiences. And I completely agree with the point that as long as the financial and the crowd turnout factor is bolstered, it is for the benefit of everyone.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Moving on to the personnel, the return of Johnny Bairstow has led to the exclusion of Ben Stokes, who in Bairstow's absence did absolutely nothing wrong to lose his place, and he's a notable absentee in that unchanged 16-man squad for the first 2 Ashes tests and the Ireland test. So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, can he feel hard done by?
Yes, absolutely. I'm some people might regard me as a conservative because I love Test cricket and there's some things I really value about it. The irony is that I also love the IPL. I think the IPL is a fantastic competition. But when it comes to Test cricket, I'm a strong believer that you need the best wicketkeeper you can get. And hopefully that wicketkeeper can bat a bit. Now, in Folks's case, not only is he a great wicketkeeper, he's a bloody good batsman. He's got an average of about 32, I think it is, which is more than a number of people who've been playing for England over the last few years in batting positions only. He has done everything that could be asked of him when he's played for England, and then he's been booted because Bairstow's fit again. Now, I don't disagree that Bairstow should be able to come back into the team, but to do it without finding a way to put Folkes, who's a more valuable player than Crawley, in my view, into the team is just totally unfair. And I think it doesn't augur well. The other thing I'll say that doesn't augur well for England is if they're being serious about the possibility of Moeen coming back in to play for Jack Leach. If that really is something they're contemplating, then that to me says to county cricketers everywhere, you've got to be part of the club to get to play, because basically the chosen few are allowed to play for England, who've done the right thing and are seen to be part of the club, and aspiring upcomers don't necessarily get a chance if Moeen comes back in. I don't think he will. I think it makes huge sense to bring someone like Will Jackson who can both spin and add a lot of strength to the batting order. But I'm really angry about Folkes. I really am. Sorry.
I'm sort of betwixt and
Did
between
I make
on
myself
it.
clear?
Yeah, I think you. So basically, it's fine. You're just glad Johnny's back. You know, bugger folks. That's I kind of agree, because I'm the same as Messi in that I'm a dyed in the wool lover of Test cricket. But life is a series of trade-offs, and professional sport is hard. I think they were always going to find a way to get Johnny Bairstow back, particularly after last year. He's very much the poster boy for the England brand of cricket. You know, the amazing year he had last year, the almost beating the Gilbert Jessop record, the innings at Trent Bridge. I mean, he has been that talisman for the way England like to play. Folkes undoubtedly is technically by far the better wicket keeper, but I could see the trade-off being made there. And I think over an English summer, well, an English month and a half, over an English month and a half, when 5 matches are extremely compacted, things might change. So if I was Ben Folkes, I would still be expecting at some point the phone might just ring. I do agree about Zac Crawley, but England will say, what is it? They've won 12 out of 13 tests. We like the way he plays. We don't want to upset too much rhythm about what, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And they see bringing Bairstow back doesn't break, isn't sort of a drastic change. It's merely retaining what they had before to a certain extent. Wait and see what's happened after the first Ashes test, or maybe the second, and I think you might see a shift around in that, depending on how things are going.
Yep, and adding to the point Messi made about playing your best wicketkeeper at all times, that is the exact precondition for which the odds are being stacked in the favor of KS Bharat over Ishan Kishan as India approach the WTC final. Because even though Ishan Kishan is a like-for-like replacement for Rishabh Pant and offers that left-handed divergence from what is a battery of right-handers in the Indian top order, the odds are still being stacked in the favor of KS Bharat because he is a better wicketkeeper, as we saw in the recently concluded Border Gavaskar Trophy.
Yeah, it's a similar. I see that similar debate. Barrett's the man with the gloves, isn't he? And he played in all 4 of the last series. 3 raging turners, followed by the flattest track you'll ever come across when all India needed was a draw. But yeah, I got a feeling they'll stick with KS Barrett for the Oval, but I'm less an expert in Hatfield.
Playing your best wicketkeeper gains even more significance in England because of the wobble factor that happens when the ball passes the stumps.
Yeah, 100%. You'll get less so possibly at the Oval from a World Test Championship perspective, but generally, you're absolutely right. Early morning, that ball's going to nip around quite a lot, and you've got two attacks in both Australia and England, regardless of which seamers ultimately come in for England. I mean, they've had their challenges in that department. I still expect England to tend to favour bowling first if they win tosses. Ben Stokes has, I think, done that in far more than any other captain, I think, in England history, probably percentage-wise. He's chosen to bowl first. I don't know. I think Pat Cummins might as well. Lords, for example, bit of cloud cover early morning. I'd be surprised. Both teams, I think, will want to get ahead of the game and look to put the other side under pressure. So you're right. The technical skills needed as a wicketkeeper for the moving ball are a factor. But Bairstow has enough experience to do that. It moved around against Ireland at Lords under some cloud cover, and I don't recall him ever, even with potentially still a slightly dodgy limping leg, he didn't actually misfield anything that I can particularly recall or put anything down. I think he's good enough with additional X factor. That's the ECB's point of view, and that's why they're stuck with him.
Correct, makes sense. And this point of less help from the surface is actually in keeping with my next question, that Ben Stokes has ordered fast and flat wickets that would allow the employment of his favored style of all-out attack. So if you've been keeping an eye on the recent reports, all the messages have been conveyed to the pitch curators that the pitches should be in keeping with the baseball style of play, the hyper-aggressive brand of cricket that has defined McCullum and Stokes here at the helm. So I just wanted to ask both of you that English cricket, as we know it, has generally revolved around green-tinged surfaces that demand watertight batting techniques, and batters across the board have struggled to score runs. So how do the pitches prescribed by Stokes, the anodyne surfaces, change and alter the dynamics of the series?
Ooh, that's an interesting one.
Well, I'd say
you take
firstly,
it first,
I don't believe it. You know, it's a pronouncement that this is what we're going to do. We'll see what we see, and to be honest, it's not always within the purview, the capacity of the groundkeeper to be able to provide the wicket that's asked for. And the other thing I'd say in relation to what you said was that it's not necessarily true to say that England wickets have always had this tinge of green and it's always been that way, any more than it's true to say that, for instance, the whacker was always fast and bouncy. There've been really dull test matches there on roads, and in England, certainly the test matches that become more dramatic are often on green seamers. But the truth is, I'm an old man. I remember the 60s, and England had some very, very dull wickets back then, and there wasn't a lot of green seam available, and long, drawn-out draws that are incredibly dull.
Edgbaston in the 80s, flat as pancakes when Dennis Amiss was scoring, 100 every game he played in. I take it a little bit with a pinch of salt, because you also have to remember that key to winning a test match, and indeed to England's approach, is aggressive field placing, bowl, not to worry about conceding runs by and large, but to take wickets. And to win a test match, you've got to take 20 wickets. So I think what I'd more and interpret that as something for bat and ball, but that encourages shot making. Otherwise, 5 draws. What Brendan McCullum and Ben Stokes have nailed their colours to the mast for is to make Test cricket sexy, exciting, watchable, clickable, YouTubeable, whatever it is. They want to make it fantastic to watch. That's their vision, and you have to have something for both bat and ball for it to be that. So I'm not expecting feather beds.
No,
I don't think.
No. Well, the other thing I'd say is that he's asked for shorter boundaries at 59 meters or whatever the minimum is. Two things about that. Firstly, I think that could actually favour Australia more than England, because England had no problem clearing the boundaries last summer, and shorter boundaries will just bring them in reach of more of the Australians, I suspect.
Yeah, you could
Um,
shoot yourself in the foot from an English perspective, couldn't you,
yeah.
in that one?
But
Tell
the
you
other
what,
thing is, I'd be really disappointed if that's the case because I like a ground where you can run three. One of the things about the 20 over World Cup in Australia last year was the fact that at grounds like the MCG and the Perth Stadium, there were big boundaries. And it changes the nature of T20 in what I think is a really good way. You probably don't get as many sixes, but you get more strategy in terms of field placements. You get more capacity for people to run three. I think it adds a dimension rather than take it away simply because people can't hit quite as many sixes.
I'll tell you
I
what,
don't know.
I would
Sorry,
love
Tony.
to be. Well, it's all right. I'd love to have been a fly on the wall if a conversation was ever had between McCullum and Stokes and Jimmy and Stuart Broad. Well, Stuart and Jimmy, I know this is likely to be your last Ashes series because one of you's over 40, one of you's nearly there. So what we're going to do is have flat batsman friendly tracks and shorter boundaries. How do you feel about that? So somehow I'm not entirely sure that I think there's some kidology going on as there ever is. Going back to our conversation, it's not trash talk as such, but there's definitely a little bit of kidology involved in some of
Yeah,
this chat.
yeah,
Yeah, because Tony, the point you make is worth noting about backfiring, because it is worth noting that Australian batters are in form. Like their top six averages 46 in the WTC, the second edition, comfortably 2 runs ahead of Pakistan. And people like Manas Labuschagne, Steve Smith, Travis Head all sit among the top seven, having aggregated 1,000+ runs at 50+ average. And in case of Head, also striking at 80 runs per 100 balls. So this could be a case of, as you rightly mentioned, shooting themselves in the foot by preparing featherbed surfaces if they are actually rolled out.
But which, of course, was
yeah.
originally done to get out of doing something. I don't think England are trying to get out of playing in the Ashes, but yeah, it's come to mean something slightly different, hasn't it? Doing one thing that should be in your favour and ends up not being. I think they will be competitive surfaces. I think they will offer something for bat and ball. I hope they don't shorten the boundaries. The variety between pitches at Trent Bridge, there's only so much you could shorten them anyway. So certainly on one
Yeah,
side,
yeah,
So
yeah.
I no, I hope they don't artificially engineer things. Too obviously, there needs to be an even contest between bat and ball, and I think there will be. I'd be slightly worried about the robustness of England's attack more so than Australia.
Yeah.
I mean, that said, they've lost Hazelwood. Boland it's going to be interesting to see how he goes. Whether Nissa does get a run, I think he will at some point because he's done so well in county cricket. I mean, there's selection conundrums aplenty on both sides, regardless of what the tracks are.
Correct,
They're not
correct.
going to be playing
And
at Trent Bridge actually, so they don't have to
Oh,
worry
well,
about that.
that's probably why. Which is
And before we dive into the selection conundrums, I would just like to add to Messi's point about it is not always easy to change the conditions of the pitch overnight, even though it is coming from the top down. So, for example, Lucknow, if you remember in the recently concluded IPL, had wickets
Oh,
where only
dreadful.
120, 130 run games were conducted. And
That
BCCI
was
made their efforts. They pulled out all stops to change the conditions of the surface and create a high scoring venue. But in the end, it all came down to a bust because the average run scorers were around 130, 140 marks. So that's absolutely on spot that it's not possible to change the conditions overnight, even if you are passing the message from the top down and wanting that transformation overnight.
that's exactly true. Yeah,
yeah, no, I would I would
it was a
100%.
dreadful pitch, like really was. They should have been made to play all their games away.
Well, yeah, I think you'd have to be playing test matches at Taunton if you wanted those,
Pitches to
the
order.
ball ragging
Yes.
square. But I don't think that's in anyone's interest in England, and
Yeah,
probably
because the
why we don't
games,
produce quite the same quality of spinners as other countries in some cases.
Well, it's an interesting question because I actually regard Australia's batter's weakness, biggest weakness, as being against good spin, which will be really interesting this week at the Oval. With I don't know if both Ashwin and Jadeja will play, but I think Australians struggle, particularly early on, against good spin. And there may be a sigh of relief that Jack Leach isn't playing, but they're probably not going to be facing a lot of turn on any of those wickets in the Ashes.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if Aryan, you want to come and talk about that, but the Leach conundrum has opened up a number of, in a way, he was nailed on because he's England's leading wicket taker, I think, isn't he? He's something like 58 wickets in the Bazball era. He's been terrific. He's been consistent, and he does give you the chance to tie down an end without, by and large, giving too much away. And that's exactly what he was doing against Ireland, as well as taking a couple of wickets. Okay, I appreciate Ireland's certain limitations due to the lack of opportunity to be genuinely test match ready. But it means that if you've taken out, it's like you had your plans in place. You've got plenty of things from an England perspective you're already worried about. You've lost Archer, you've lost Ollie Stone, you had doubts about Robinson until sort of fairly recently. The one thing you were kind of counting on, inked in, would be Jack Leach, and then all of a sudden you've lost Jack Leach. But it's interestingly, he's bowled more overs by far than anyone else in the Baz, let's call it the Bazball era, since last year against New Zealand. And therefore, perhaps it's not necessarily, but you just don't expect spinners to get stress fractures. But he's certainly been the most used England bowler, and quite, silent hero, really. Everyone notices what the seamers do. The reality is he's been an unspectacular but highly effective, consistent factor in the way England have played. I think psychologically, in some ways, it's a bit of a blow for them. And how they replace him, well, I don't think they'll go to Parkinson. Sorry to say for our friend Gary Naylor, but I don't think they'll go to Parkinson. I think they're more like they've put the call out to Moeen, who basically said, I'm done with Test cricket. Hasn't played any red ball cricket forever. And suddenly you want him to come in and hold an end and do the Leach role. They'd have to rethink the way they actually deployed the spinner. Okay, he might add something to your batting, but even his recent red ball form when he last played was shall we say, pointing down rather than up to when he was at his finest. That just feels a bit of a panic measure to me. I think their heart would be, well, let's give Rayan Ahmed a go, and maybe if we had Ahmed and Jacks, we can mix and match those two. I think that would be potentially quite exciting. Both offer you a lot as well in the batting department from an attacking perspective. But a young man like Rayan Ahmed, he's not going to tie down and end the way a Jack Leach would. So again, if you go back to, if England were genuinely going to play on flat batsman friendly tracks, and you don't even have a Leach to tie an end down, it's another reason why you'd go, well, hang on, that's you've shot yourself in both feet in a way. So I guess my gut feel is I don't think Moeen will come back, but by the time you issue this, they will have made an announcement, and I might be wrong. I think they're more likely to go for the more all-rounded option of Jacks and or Rayan Ahmed. And a lot of this, the mystery factor that no one is fully sure about, is does Ben Stokes play as an additional seamer, or is he just batting only? Everyone who watched him against Ireland at Lords, every time he went to field, you thought, oh Lord, he's gone down. Oh, look at that. He's hyperextending his tendonitis in his knee and, all this kind of stuff. It was a heart and mouth moment every time he went near the ball in the field. First captain, I think, to win a test match ever without actually batting, bowling or keeping in the entire test match. So he's clearly looking after himself. Your selection of a spinner and who and how might genuinely come down to honesty, which I'm sure there is within the England camp. We're just not seeing it from the outside. as to what are the chances that Ben Stokes will actually be fit to bowl and how much. If the answer is sporadically and just occasionally as a partnership breaker, then they're going to have to think very hard about that spin option, I reckon.
It brings to the fore what I think is a really interesting factor. That is, against Ireland, and with greatest respect to Ireland, it wasn't the toughest opposition. But basically, England were playing 10 men and a captain. I don't think they can afford to do that against Australia. And even if Stokes bats, well, let me put it this way. No other player would be past fit to play if on the criterion Stokes sets for himself that he said, if I can walk, I will be playing. That's not good enough. It's just a double standard. And I would have thought that the reality is that if, for example, you do have a match that goes for 5 days, or several matches that go for 5 days, your bowlers are going to need to spread the load around. And particularly without Jack Leach, who, as you say, bowled more overs than anybody else, even if you have someone like Rian Ahmed or Will Jacks, it's unlikely that they'll bowl to the same extent that Leach did. So if you're depriving yourself of an extra bowler, and I know Stokes has said that he will bowl, but at what cost? Is he actually going to damage himself further by bowling when he's actually not fit to do it? He has to have a cortisone injection to bowl every time. My judgment is that unless he's fit, they should actually leave him as non-playing captain on the edge of the field and put another seamer in there, or another all-rounder at least who can bowl some pace. Because otherwise, I think they're making it really hard for themselves.
Spoken like a true Australian.
Yeah, that's a valid point.
I can't see a scenario they'll leave him out unless he's literally he's bedbound. I can't see it happening.
Well, I'm willing to predict that he will not play all 5 tests in the series.
That might be true. And Ollie Pope, I think, is designated as vice captain, which would be, wow, that would be really interesting. That would be a really interesting situation.
Because at this moment, his presence and the philosophy that he brings to the ground is equivalent to the all-round skills that he has, right?
Yeah. I mean, much as Bairstow is iconic, sort of in the the style, talismanic, I suppose. Then so of course is Ben Stokes. No one will forget Headingley in 2019, and that sort of one-man effort that's equivalent to Botham in 81. I think probably even better. It depends, on your generation, I guess. But for a modern generation of cricket followers, Stokes, arms aloft, Headingley, just exploding with joy and relief as he somehow hauled England over the line in that Test match, is such something that will live forever. It's to me, that's up there with the Shane Warne ball of the century, the Botham Ashes, that as what Test cricket can be when it's fiercely competitive and at its ultimate best. And Ben Stokes is there. So apart from Messi, I don't think you'll find a single Australian who would go, I think, we'd rather Ben Stokes was in the team, not out of it. I think they'd all be happiest if Ben Stokes wasn't in an England team and never do what is going to please your opponents. So I don't see it happening except just purely on fitness.
Yeah, and Messi's point about alleviating the burden across the bowlers just made me hark back to the onset of the Border Gavaskar Trophy, where there was this conversation going between the Australian frontline spinners that who can partner and share the burden with Nathan Lyon. Because at that moment, Todd Murphy and Matthew Koonman weren't really in the scheme of things. So the spin bowling attack hadn't been rubber stamped as of now. And the Australian media was sort of hyping up Marnus Labuschan's spin. And then he made a frank admission that he was not quite in the same league as a Matthew Kuhlman or a Todd Murphy. So similarly, asking 10-15 overs of Joe Root actually dilutes the potency of the English attack, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. And no part-time spinner. I know Joe Root occasionally says, I'm an all-rounder, not a part-time spinner, but I don't genuinely think he believes it. I think it's slightly in jest. It's never going to be, I think, as good as a specialist. Of course, they'll have amazing spells. I mean, Joe Root can always point to, what was it, 5 for 7? Might have even been 7 for 5. I can't remember which way. But that was on a sort of a snake's
raging turner
nest of viper's nest of turning the ball turning. I think he'll definitely get some overs, and he definitely offers you something. And he's got a leg break he's added to his off breaks, and he likes to come around the wicket.
Bouncer that he has that comes
yeah, he's got the bouncer. Yeah. So he's a useful additional asset, particularly when the mantra is bowl to take wickets, not to save runs. But you don't want to be relying on him. That's still my point of view.
I'd agree entirely.
Yeah, and the selection predicaments, I think, manifest themselves most starkly at the top of the order for both the teams. Because speaking of Zac Crawley and David Warner, so as far as Zac Crawley is concerned, before the Ireland test, obviously it's not an opposition exactly bristling with quality, and that's why probably he's able to get runs. But his overall test average was 27 from 33 games, with 300s, and since the half century and 100 in the Rawalpindi test against Pakistan, he failed to pass 15 8 innings. And then, after notching a ton in the West Indies in March 2022, he actually went 16 innings without a 50. So, that is not in keeping with the standards that are expected out of an international cricketer nowadays. McCullum and Rob Crawley actually echoed their sentiments that we are not expecting consistency from Crawley, which actually made Nasir Hussain scratch his head. That what are you exactly talking about? So I would just like to know from you guys, being avid followers of English cricket, that what is the exact mindset behind the handling of Crawley, and is the optimism actually misplaced in just backing him to the hilt?
Well, possibly yes. When he does come off, he puts runs. Now let's take Ireland again with the classic, no disrespect to Ireland, but the proviso. He and Duckett together rattled that scoring rate along to put England into an incredibly strong position. So what England crave and look to do is get the runs on the board quickly. Strike rates for England in the, let's call it the Bazball era, have been like double ever anything under Joe Root. They want to attack from the off with the bat. They want to give their bowlers the maximum time to bowl the opposition out. Crawley, when he does come off, is well equipped to do that, as is Ben Duckett. It's why a Sibley or a Burns ultimately we went by the wayside, although I think one could argue technical issues with both. I think possibly they've been in previous eras 100%, Crawley would not be still there. I just feel they believe if he comes good once every 3 or 4, that still helps them to achieve that objective. And so they want to stick with him. I reckon people will divide themselves into 2 camps: dyed-in-the-wool traditionalists, where I'm looking at one now from where I'm sitting, and those who are slightly more adventurous. I think McCullum, and with him Ben Stokes, will take the more left field options on occasions if it's all about attacking. What can we do to be more attacking? What can we do to put sides more under pressure? And I think they see Crawley, although flawed, as able to help them do that.
Fair
and
point,
go back to looking at the record with him playing, even if his own contributions have been patchy.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things with Crawley. from Stokes and McCallum's point of view, when they first set on this path, one of the things they sought to develop amongst the England players, and have done very successfully, is removing fear from their agenda, so that if they didn't score runs, it wasn't going to mean that all of a sudden they were no longer likely to be picked. That they had some sort of future with the team, even if they got out for a low score, but they were trying to follow the agenda. And I think that's worked really well for them over the last year. But I saw McCallum being interviewed in the lunch break on the first day of the Ireland test by that short-haired bloke from Sky, his name I can't remember. But
Ian Ward?
Yes, it may well have been Ian Ward. And it was, my sense is that a lot of the cricket press are very English cricket press are very deferential to both McCallum and Stokes because of the success they've had. And as a result, tend not to push too hard on things that may be really tricky. And McCallum's answer in relation to Crawley was that he has huge potential. He plays some beautiful shots, which he certainly does, and that he can come good, basically. The question is, how long do you wait for that to happen? Because, even in the 56 he made at Lord's, 19 of those, 19 were French cuts between the wicketkeeper and the leg slip. He was very lucky to get to 56, but he played a couple of exquisite drives as well. But consistency in an opener is really important, even an attacking opener. And we'll come to Warner in a second, but Warner's history has been one of being an attacking opener who has a good defence when he chooses to use it, and has therefore got through those times and then gone on to accelerate, rather than thinking you have to hit every ball for four. Now, I'd say over the last year that's gone out of his head a bit, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens at the Oval, because I think that will set the stage for whether or not he plays in the Ashes. But with Crawley, I don't sense that discipline that's required of an opener. No matter how attacking the team mantra may be, there are things you need to do as an opener, and one of them is to get the shine off the ball and weather the early stages. And I mean, England's had a massive problem with that over the last 4 or 5 years, without any doubt at all. So that Root has almost ended up as an opener a lot at the time when he was batting at 3. But I just don't think you can keep saying Crawley can stay there and we won't give anybody else a go because we think he's got potential. Warner, well, I don't know, but
Warner's a fascinating one to me. I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
Because he's kind of put pressure on himself. He basically has said, I want to retire. I want to retire under my own terms. And I want to do it at the SCG. No. I think, again, in much the same way as any Australian would be happier if Stokes wasn't in the England team. I think most English fans will be happy if Warner's in the Australian team, if only for the fact that everybody wants to see the next round of Stuart Broad versus David Warner. Broad's he'll be coming around the wicket to the left-hander. At Lord's, which I think is the second test, you'll have the slope working either for or against you with that scenario. Everybody wants to see it. It's still the Ali and Foreman of cricket. Yep. In their both in their latter years. Is 2 old stagers slugging it out who've got previous history. Everybody wants to know how that's going to go. However, if you get some early failures, I say first 2 tests, I don't think Australia will be patient into the 3rd test as far as David Warner's concerned, and he won't get his wish.
Yeah, before the IPL, I thought Warner should be out of Test cricket altogether. Ironically, the way he played in the IPL, he scored a lot of runs in the IPL, but he didn't do them at T20 speeds. Although the last couple of games he played, he quickened up. But what he did was graft it. And as an opener, if you're not in touch, grafting is a really fucking strong attribute. Excuse my French. But I think it's really good that there is the WTC Championship for him to play in, because he can show whether he's managed to accept the discipline that comes with that position now and not get out flashing in the second over to something outside the off stump that should have been left well alone. So, you can't deny that he's got a fantastic history, but he's got a dreadful history in England. So,
Yeah,
should he be there?
I go
I
along
don't
with
know.
that. I think yes for the first two. Let's see what happens. Bit
Yeah, and I
Crawley-like. He's the
strongly
Australian
concur with
Crawley conundrum.
Messi's view that eliminating fear has been the underpinning behind the baseball philosophy. Because if you guys know about Paddy Upton, the mental health conditioning coach who won India the 2011 World Cup, he has always maintained that fear of failure and performance pressure are the two single biggest hindrances to elite performance in cricket.
Well, yes, and psychology in sport as the extra 2%. You have to have the technical ability, you have to have the determination, you have to have the physical fitness, you have to have all of those other things. But psychology in sport is always a fascinating aspect of being able. The belief that you can do it is huge. And Australia have always, both sides will use that, and the Ashes is because it's such a under the microscope event or series of events, depending on how you want it. It always brings that to the fore. I go back to Steve Waugh and mental disintegration. His whole approach over England was, at the end of the day, they're soft. I remember, I can't remember, Messi, who's got a longer memory than me. Who was it? Who said the England side who famously, somebody said they can't bat, they can't bowl, they can't field. And when they went to tour Australia and actually won, didn't they?
Well, no, actually, that was Shane Warne. Well, he denied it, but it was about a player, Colin Muller, who was picked to play for Australia, who frankly wasn't great. And it was picked up by the stump microphone, and the claim was that it was said by one of the cameramen, but it was clearly Shane Warne that said it about one of his colleagues. Can't bat, can't bowl, can't throw.
Well, and also, I mean,
which is the name of the podcast that Dan Liebke and Cat, Cricket Bat Cat had.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned Shane Warne. I think this is the first Ashes since he sadly left us, which adds a certain poignancy to it. You won't find an English fan who doesn't love Shane Warne. But going back to that psychology point of view, before every Ashes he played in, he'd been working on a new mystery delivery. There's only so many. There's one that goes this way, there's one that goes that way, and there's one that goes straight. There's only so many mysteries you can come up with. But the psychology of believing there might be this new ball, and Stuart Broad is taken up that mantle as well to a certain extent.
When I said talked about taking the piss.
Yeah, well, but to me that's all that's the fun side. That's the joy of it's better than trash talk because it's got witticism, it's funny, but also it ratchets up the tension and the anticipation for sure. And Warne, waiting for the war. For Shane Warne's, what's the new ball he's going to decimate England with this time? That's all rooted in psychology.
Yeah,
so never underestimate it.
Yeah, the psychological battles and the amount of impact an Ashes series has on people's mental health has been immense. Because if you consider reading the biographies of Marcus Trescothick or Jonathan Trott, how they were tormented by. The latter was tormented by Mitchell Johnson in the Ashes series, and what effect
I was just thinking of that. It was extraordinary, wasn't it?
It just left him in tatters. So
it did. And Stephen Finn, unselectable, and the horrible tour he had. It does. It puts you right in. It exposes you. It puts you right in the spotlight. Go back to the folks or the folks conversation we had a little while ago, it is a tough sport. It's brilliant, magnificent, gripping entertainment. Has its rewards, but you're right under the spotlight for an intensive period of time. It stretches every mental and physical aspect of you, and that's why it's called Test cricket. It's why it's not a T20 thrash. It's why it's not a one-day international. It's Test cricket because it is the ultimate test of all aspects of your ability in playing the game. And I shall now get off my soapbox.
Some really profound observations in this episode, and I'm thrilled to have both of you in this Ashes preview. Thank you so much for coming, guys.
Well, we were delighted. Thank you so much. It's been a delight.
Thank you very much. It's been great fun.